from Williams College and a doctorate in economics from Boston University. He is a graduate of the Executive Development Program, jointly sponsored by Harvard, Stanford, and INSEAD. Commencing his career with the elite civil service of Pakistan, he later joined the World Bank, where he held a variety of positions over the years. He was appointed governor of the State Bank of Pakistan in December 1999. During the next 6 years, he implemented a major program of restructuring the central bank and steered banking sector reforms that are recognized as being among the best in developing countries. He is presently the Dean and Director of the IBA. He is also currently the Chairman, World Economic Forum Global Advisory Council on Pakistan. Dr. Hussain has maintained an active scholarly interest in development issues. He has authored 12 books and monographs and contributed more than 24 articles in journals and 15 chapters in books on related subjects. Dr. Ishrat Hussain.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Olson here this afternoon. This is a big surprise of the KLF because nobody knew what I'm going to moderate. So it was something which I think the participants present here would immensely enjoy. Ambassador Olson has been in Pakistan, but before that he had a very distinguished career in Afghanistan and as our ambassador in US ambassador in the United Arab Emirates, and before that in Saudi Arabia, Iraq. So he's very well conversant with the Middle East and this region, and that is something which we are very fortunate to have a person of his caliber. So welcome to KLF.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Let me begin by saying something which perhaps the audiences in Pakistan do not appreciate, that the policy making in the United States is a very complex subject. Not only that you have the executive branch in which there are pushes and pulls and tussles between the State Department and the CIA and the Pentagon and the White House, you have Congress, which is sitting on the top of the executive branch with divided Congress, one party controlling the Senate, the other party controlling the House, and then you have a very robust, vibrant media like Fox News, which really shapes the opinions in the United States. So I do want to emphasize that there's not a single ray which shows that this is the US policy. So this is an introduction I wanted to make to our audience so that the ambassador is at ease in explaining that there's no monolithic, homogeneous, unified policy structure in the United States. So I felt that I must clarify. What I would like to do is to start with a few questions to the ambassador, and later on, about half an hour later, I would open up the floor, because I'm sure with the very distinguished people sitting in this gathering who know more about the US-Pakistan relations than I do, they will be the persons who will contribute to this conversation. So let me sketch out a little bit of the context in which we are situated today. Pakistan was one of the earlier allies of the US through the CENTO and the CETO. Then came the 65 war, and Pakistanis were disappointed that their ally in that pact actually did not come to their help. Then happened 71, despite Nixon Kissinger tilt towards Pakistan, which has been publicized and documented, there was no tangible initiative from the US to come to the rescue of this country. Then came the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and all of a sudden, Pakistan became a very strong ally of the United States. Then the Soviet Union was kicked out, it collapsed, and Pakistan was left high and dry with 2 to 3 million refugees crossing over to the border. Then 2001 happens, and again, Pakistan is considered as an ally. The cost which Pakistanis think they have given in return are enormous, are destabilizing. This whole drug culture, Kalashnikov culture, and the religious extremism can be traced back to the 1980s for the first Afghan war. This whole suicide bombing, the Tehreek-e-Taliban, the sectarian violence, the killings, the loss of $100 billion have all happened after 2001. Pakistanis are now saying, what do we expect after 2014 when the United States is going to withdraw fully, partially, we don't know. Mr. Karzai hasn't given you the signal so far as to what he wants to do. What is in for us? Because we have been bracketed as F-Pak. So if F is no longer of your interest, what is going to happen to Pak? So that's my first question to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hussain. And first of all, let me express my appreciation for the invitation from the Karachi Literary Festival. It's a great pleasure to be here beside the sea on a sunny afternoon. And we're delighted to be once again helping to sponsor the Karachi Literary Festival. In terms of your question, I think you raised a very good point, and one that is a topic of dialogue between the United States and Pakistan. We are just coming back from a strategic dialogue in Washington, where a strong Pakistani delegation led by Senior Advisor Sartaj Aziz met with Secretary Kerry and discussed precisely these sort of questions. And let me start by sort of answering the topic question: will the Pakistan-U.S. relationship endure? I think it will. You laid out the fact that for 65 years we have been partners and indeed allies, with ups and downs, and I understand very much the narrative that you laid out. I think I would like to focus a little bit on sort of the end portion of that narrative, because one of the fundamental points that I would make is the United States deeply learned the lessons of 1989. And I think that we recognize that, and certainly it is within, as you described at the beginning, and thank you for describing the American separation of powers, but certainly within the executive branch, and I think within large parts of the legislative branch of the U.S. government, there is a recognition that in the period 1989 to 1992, we made mistakes. We made mistakes with regard to disengaging from the first mistake was probably to have not included in the Geneva Accords a plan for a political settlement in Afghanistan. There was no political component to a domestic Afghan political component. Then the disengagement from the region, and especially from Pakistan in the 90s, is also something that we recognize led to difficulties not just for Pakistan, for the entire region, and ultimately for the United States, and in some sense, some of the seeds of September 11th, 2001 are to be found in that decision-making process in the period 1989 to 1992. So it has been very much on our minds that we do not want 2014 to be seen as a repeat of 1989. And let me first of all say that I don't want to draw an analogy between what was done by the Soviet Union in Afghanistan between 1979 and 1989 and what has been done in the last 12 years. I think there are fundamental political and moral differences. But in any case, leave that aside for the moment. I know that in the region, the narrative is very much about the parallels between 1989 and 2014. So we have worked with the Afghans over, especially the course of the last 3 or 4 years, I would break it down into 3 different areas. First, in security. The security transition that will occur on December 31st, 2014 is planned to be not a withdrawal of U.S. or NATO forces, but rather a drawdown. We have made clear that we are prepared to have a residual force, both at the level of NATO and at the level of the United States. The exact force structure has not been decided upon, and as you correctly noted, is contingent upon an Afghan invitation, and I'll come back to that. The second area, and the other piece of this, though I should mention the security front, is the buildup of the Afghan army. It is the most capable army that Afghanistan has ever had. It has been built up in relatively short period, but it's had a strength of about 352,000, and it is an army that is capable of defending Afghan territory against the threat from the Taliban. And that's not a theory. That has been, I think, shown over the course of the last fighting season, because effectively, in some ways, the transition has already taken place. Most of the fighting is now done by Afghans. On the economic front, there are substantial commitments from the international community, most notably made at Bonn and the Tokyo conferences, to fund the Afghan government at least through 2017, and indeed implicitly at least through 2025. And then finally, in the area of politics, again, drawing on the lessons of the mistakes of the Geneva Accord, we have been promoting the idea of an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned reconciliation process between the Taliban and the government. And at the same time, obviously, there is going ahead an election in April, which we think will also play an important role in the transition. So there's been a lot of careful planning for an Afghan security transition at the end of the year that will be orderly and is meant to address not just concerns of Afghans, but also concerns of the region, because we think the worst thing that could happen would be for there to be competition amongst the regional states in Afghanistan after 2014 in a situation where there are proxy wars, and I think all of us want to avoid that. We are confident, actually, that the bilateral security agreement has the support of the Afghan people. It was expressed in the extraordinary Loya Jirga that President Karzai convened in the fall. It's of course a military matter, and so I'm not an expert on this, but in terms of planning for the drawdown, and there is time still for that to be done in an orderly period. So I think we have confidence that the overwhelming majority of the Afghan people have shown that they're interested in a partnership with the international community going forward, and want to preserve the changes that have been made over Afghanistan over the course of the last 12 years. So all of that, I think, means that but to address your fundamental question, in terms of the relationship between Pakistan and the United States, We're working to address the Afghanistan concern, but we also want to make sure that our relationship with Pakistan is strong, independent of the question of Afghanistan. And that's why we have relaunched after the difficult year of 2011. We have relaunched a strategic dialogue, why we engage on a variety of topics, including the topics that I think are probably very important to Pakistanis, such as energy and the economy, which are two of the 5 working groups that we have under the strategic dialogue, which occupied quite a bit of time when we were in Washington a few weeks ago. So I think what we want to be thinking about is a relationship between the United States and Pakistan that is targeted not on December 31st, 2014, but rather is targeted on 2050, targeted on the middle of the century when Pakistan will be the 4th largest country in the world demographically, and an important force in the region and globally.
Well, let me come to the economic issues. As a student of the US-Pakistan relations, what I find very troubling is that the US taxpayers are always very frustrated and disgusted that they are paying money through the Kerry-Lugar bill to an ungrateful nation. And all this money is going down the drain. In Pakistan, on the other hand, there are people who argue that we have become a state, that whenever the US wants to use us for their own strategic interests, they dole out some money to us, and this is what we return, and we become subservient, and we lose our, sovereignty. In return, if you look at what has happened, I was a part of the task force which was looking at the US aid in Washington, and we do not know as to how much money has actually been authorized, how much has been appropriated, how much has actually been disbursed. And the government of Pakistan claims that they get very little out of the US aid 1.5 authorization. So that's one issue about the economy. The second is that should we continue, if this is such a contentious issue, and all the Pew polls show that Pakistan is not considered very favorably by the US public opinion, and same is the case here in Pakistan, that the US is not being considered, shouldn't we reconsider this strategy? Shouldn't we go for trade, for example, where jobs are created, which is a very low risk, high payoff? Why don't we bring in investment from the US into Pakistan, transfer of technology, so that we can become a state which can take care of its own problems? So what I would like you, Mr. Ambassador, to consider this particular scenario, which has not done a great deal of good to the relationship, and see whether we can move in a completely different direction where Pakistan and the US both will be the beneficiaries.
Well, thank you. Let me just first sketch out what we have been doing over the past 4 or 5 years. Our various assistance programs have amounted to roughly, about $3 billion a year, divided into 3 distinct programs. One is the Kerry-Lugar-Berman money that you described. That is the civilian assistance program, which is focused in 5 areas: energy, economic growth, what we call stabilization, which is really extending the government's writ into areas of conflict, and then health and education, which are programs that we have around the world. Then the next pot is security assistance. That's military provision of military equipment primarily, and training and assistance to Pakistan to conduct counterinsurgency operations. And then the final area is the Coalition Support Fund, which is actually a reimbursement for the expenses, which all of us acknowledge. And I want to start, say I want to acknowledge the point that you made in the initial question about the sacrifices that Pakistan has made, the many thousands of people who died, and the great cost that Pakistan has endured over the course of the past 12 years. So that is what we've been focused on. And you mentioned about public opinion. We of course are concerned about public opinion, and we would like for the Pakistani people to have a sense of partnership with the American people. But that's not why we do the assistance. The reason for the assistance is to advance what we see as a strategic partnership. I mean, we think it is very important for Pakistan to, for instance, tackle the energy crisis, which has been building for a number of years, and we have a very active dialogue in this area talking about reform, but also we've done a lot on the ground in terms of adding 1,000 megawatts to the national grid through our various projects, three high-del projects and 2 thermal plants over the course of the past few years. So I think the real importance is what has been done over this period. But I fundamentally agree with your point that what is more important over time is investment, and we very much agree with the government's slogan, the Pakistan government's slogan of trade and investment, not just aid. To that end, one small example. Minister Abbasi and I led a delegation to Houston in November, and Houston, of course, is basically the energy capital of the world, to encourage private sector investment amongst the energy majors in Pakistan's energy sector in 2 areas: development and exploration of existing resources, principally non-conventional gas in Pakistan. But also in the proposed LNG importation scheme that the government is putting forward on an aggressive schedule. So I think that I think that investment is an important area. The United States has always been one of the largest investors in Pakistan. We are usually along with China, the 2 top investors at any given moment. The one point I would make, though, and it's a bit of a challenge, is that, and this is a global phenomenon, as you know, international investment, while it's important, almost always follows domestic investment. The thing that I think will be very important for Pakistan is to show going forward with the reform programs that it is investing its resources and that there is substantial levels of domestic investment, and that is by the Pakistani private sector, which is also in a good position to do so, and that will lead to more foreign investment following on.
I'd like to press you a little bit more on trade. I have personally been arguing the fact that North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia can still be textile states if they form joint ventures where the fabrication is done in Pakistan and the marketing and designing and the retail and product quality is done in those states. Mm-hmm. Somehow or the other, this is just not sinking in. GSP Plus by European Union has done more for the textile industry of Pakistan because the jobs are being created, value addition is taking place. So as an ally of Pakistan, if you are interested in unemployment being reduced, exports going up, foreign exchange reserves being built up, this is the best way. Peterson Institute in Washington has estimated that average US tariff against Pakistani textile is 18%. which is quite high. So I think my suggestion to you and to the government of the US is that if you really want to win the hearts and the minds of Pakistanis, you must try to provide market access to the Pakistani textiles. And that, I think, will be something which will be welcomed both here and will be beneficial to the United States also.
Well, let me give you, Dr. Hussain and the audience, the benefit of a very candid answer on this. First of all, I think you make an excellent point, and market access is, I think, an important topic that we have to discuss further, and which we recognize as an important part of the dialogue. To that end, we're having a TIFA Council meeting, to put it in jargon, which is a Trade and Investment Framework Agreement Council meeting taking place next month in Washington between the U.S. and Pakistan. We hope the Commerce Minister will be coming to meet with his counterpart, Ambassador Mike Froman, the Special Trade Representative, to talk about ways forward in the trade relationship. But my candor comes in because I have to admit that right now we don't have as good a story to tell on trade as perhaps we might have. Under the Generalized System of Preferences, the GSP, Pakistan gets about 3,500 duty-free lines of goods have duty-free entry into the United States, including some but not all the key textile lines for Pakistan. Unfortunately, GSP, which is our signature program, has lapsed. The authority for it lapsed, and you talked about at the beginning of the separation of powers. The Congress has not reapproved the GSP. We are hopeful they will. They have in the past. So I think that we have to say that, and just in the spirit of complete candor, that this is an area of the relationship that I think we have to work on. And I think the points that you made and others have made are important ones, and we recognize them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Now it's time for me to open the floor. Do we have microphones so that we can go in? I see several hands. So, yes, sir. Ji.
My Swalam sir.
Mic on कर ले.
Mike, that what happens if the government of Pakistan accepts the Taliban demand for Sharia to be implemented in Pakistan? How do you respond? What would you do? What will happen to Pak if that happens? Thank you.
Collect some questions, and then I think Ambassador would be in a position to answer. Amin?
Ambassador, paranoia is generally the norm these days in most of the societies. In the US, 23% of the population feels President Obama is a closet Muslim. You have people saying that we never landed on the moon, or for that matter, Elvis Presley is still alive. In Pakistan, we have our shares of paranoia that US is interested in breaking up the country to get hold of nuclear assets. Now, we can laugh about it, but the ground reality is that, you have large swatches of population who truly believe in these things. As far as US government is concerned, I feel that it has lacked certain sensitivities into account these ground realities, especially when you say, do more. That was the mantra earlier on. And the do more, Pakistan should do more. That was a mantra earlier on. And similarly, the statements that get flashed, which are sometimes demeaning against Pakistan, which gets flashed over here, I do understand, there are various sectors, that within Washington, but I think there has to be a very high degree of sensitivity with this thing. For example, the U.S. medical teams and did a lot of goodwill, more than $1 billion than you guys spend on aid.
I'll request everyone to be brief because there are many people who are trying to ask questions and I want to give time to everyone. Here, this way. Salahuddin Sahab.
Welcome to the discussion, Ambassador Hussain. And I'm grateful to Dr. Ishrat Hussain for allowing me to do this. My question resembles the recent Congress Act which President Obama has sent to on the restrictions placed that President's certification has to be issued for the annual aid to Pakistan. Now, to my mind, it's a Pressler-like restriction which we faced earlier, and it provides a veto in India's hand. What is your comment? Recently, Congress passed a legislation which was assented to by President Obama, which says that $3 million aid to Pakistan has been restricted. And in future, all aid will be confined to presidential certification that yes, Pakistan is following US policy and US aims and objectives in the region. Now, this is, in my opinion, is another Pressler-like amendment which has placed veto in India's hand. What do you recommend?
Right. On the first question, which was about the U.S. position on the talks and possible outcomes of the talks. First of all, we don't take a position on Pakistan's internal security arrangements and the steps that the government of Pakistan is taking to address those security concerns. The United States does, of course, have an interest, I think you could say a fairly strategic interest, in Pakistan re-extending its full authority, the authority of the government, the writ of the state, into all of its territory, including into the FATA. And we're supportive of government efforts to do that. The methods by which that is undertaken is entirely up to the government of Pakistan. So we really don't have a position on the question of the talks between the government and the TTP, or indeed any of the specific topics that may be under discussion. With regard to the second question about paranoia and the impact on the relationship, and I think you're absolutely right that there are unfortunately conspiracy theories perhaps on both sides, and there is. We try to address here, I mean, myself and my team, we try to address some of the concerns of the Pakistanis about the United States and address some of these perhaps more paranoid concerns. But it's true that they also exist in the United States, and there's work to be done on improving, let's say, the public image and public understanding of Pakistan within the United States. But I would mention a couple of things. You mentioned some lack of sensitivity on the part of the United States. And, you know, I mean, anyone who knows Americans knows that we can lack sensitivity. We can be very direct. We're a big country, and we have, as Dr. Hussain said at the beginning, a lot of we don't have a very centralized system of governance or decision making, and a lot of opinions are expressed. And I think some of the opinions that you might be referring to, in fact, don't necessarily reflect government position. You did mention two words, I'm not going to say them because I never say them. They are part of an old narrative that no longer exists. And I would challenge you to find any U.S. government official who has said it in the last 3 or 4 years, those words. I would say on breaking up the country. There are people, of course, who have make comments that are not accordant with U.S. policy. Let me just say definitively that the policy of the United States government is to support and respect the territorial integrity of Pakistan. Now, there are people, including members of Congress, who express views that would appear to be contrary to that. Those are private views. They have not been enacted into legislation. And our system, again, echoing what Dr. Hussain said at the beginning, our legislature is particularly independent of the executive branch. That's true in many countries, but in the United States with the presidential system, we don't have a parliamentary system. Even when the legislative branch, the two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives, are controlled by the same party as the president, it's not like a parliamentary system where they're all together. The Congress is still an independent entity. So there are a lot of independent views expressed in Congress, and those are essentially the private views of congressmen, and especially on this point, on the question of territorial integrity. But I do want to say a few things on a bit more on sensitivities towards Pakistan. One thing I think that perhaps has gone a little bit unremarked, but I think it's a point that's worth making, is that the United States has been accused at various times in the past, and perhaps with justice, of having intervened in domestic Pakistani politics. And I think if you look at the last year and the successful transition from one civilian authority to another through elections, I think no one has made an allegation that the United States was involved or exerting any kind of undue influence during that period. In fact, we were exceptionally careful to not get involved in Pakistani politics. And we regard the consolidation of democracy in Pakistan as something that is, both in our national interest and frankly accomplishes a long-term objective with regard to policy towards Pakistan. So I think, in our own way, despite the fact that we have a multiplicity of power centers and a multiplicity of voices, we do try to be sensitive to Pakistani concerns and to address them. And I would also, draw your attention to the comments of that President Obama made in the State of the Union address on a topic that I'm sure someone will raise this afternoon, but I'm not going to be the one to raise it. Let's see, the last point on the question of I'm not sure I caught exactly all the nuance of the question, but I think the reference was to the $33 million that was withheld by an act of Congress. It was actually in the passage of the budget. Well, let me just say on this that again, this goes back to the separation of powers. The administration did not request, that is to say the executive branch of the U.S. government, the president, and the branch that I work for did not request such a reduction, and we believe, as I said in my earlier remarks, that assistance to Pakistan is very much in our interest. We believe that the growth of the Pakistani economy and all of the other things that we attempt to accomplish with our assistance program are very much in our national interest. So, and I would say that the 33 million comes in the context of, again, an overall package of about $3 billion a year. So not to minimize it, but and it was passed as a matter of legislation. So I think there are questions, I think, how this exactly will be it will be implemented, but it was not the desire of the executive branch, at least of the U.S. government, to bring that about, that effect.
I'll go to the middle of the room because I don't want to just monopolize in the front. So can you take the mic to the middle, please? 3 questions from the middle, and then I'll go to the end.
I have a very simple question. First of all, let me compliment Dr. Ishrat Hussain for his wonderful analysis and questions. One of the questions that he raised, a very important one, was the transfer of technology. And you, Ambassador Olson, also talked about a strategic dialogue that you held with the Minister Abbasi in November last year and only 2 weeks ago again. This was regarding the development of the oil and gas sector, exploration of the gas being in particular. And we all know how important energy is for us. My question, could the transfer of technology, the cost of it, not be met through the Kerry Lugar amounts that you sent to us? And how soon do you think that this transfer of technology will actually take effect? Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello. So I agree with Mr. Ishrat Hussain. Number one, 3 points I have. Soviet Union, Afghanistan was invaded by Soviet Union on its own strategic interest. And you countered them on its strategic interest. Number one. Number two, East Wing, that is the half of the Pakistan was lost with the help of India and Soviet Union. And US was assuring Pakistan that their 7th fleet is coming, which never came. Now, number 3, war against terror. जी तो मैं ये पॉइंट बोल रहा हूं तो उसका फिर कमेंट्स मांगूंगा ना जरा ये वार अगेंस्ट that it is not the war of Pakistan, it is the war of US which Pakistan is fighting. Number 2, in this, नहीं मुझे मुकम्मल करने coming from US is much less than what actually Pakistan is incurring on that with the taxpayer.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello. Yes. Being associated with the Karachi Chamber of Commerce for so long, about over 20 years, and as a businessman, I have observed that more money has flown out of Pakistan than it has come in the shape of aid. According to an estimate, over $150 billion over the last 12 years have flown out the capital flight because of the war on terror that we are involved in and the repercussions of which we feel in cities like Karachi. It's a porous border that is Afghanistan, and by engaging into that effort, we are losing much more in terms of investment, in terms of capital, than we are getting this peanut, which is called 2 billion or 1.5 billion, and the US press says that it is billions of dollars which are going to Pakistan, which is not true. We would rather not have that and be embarrassed. We would rather have more trade and help from our friends to create a better image of Pakistan. It is the image which is costing us a lot in the US press because our business counterparts do not come into into Pakistan. Rather, we have to meet them outside in Dubai and other places. So what can you do about giving a better press to Pakistan and stopping this image sort of tarnishing in the US press and media?
My name is Waqar Mohammed.
Okay, the first question was about technology transfer, and particularly in the energy sector. I must say I'm not quite sure what technology we're talking about, but I can tell you that one of the things that we discussed in the most recent, well, actually in the energy working group in November that met in Washington, and as recently as a week and a half ago, in Washington when Minister of Water and Power Khawaja Asif met with our Secretary of Energy, Mr. Muniz. There was discussion about ways that we can help with Pakistan's development of renewable energy and also non-conventional gas, that is to say tight gas and conceivably shale gas. As you know, there has been a revolution in the United States in the production of oil and gas from underlying geological structures from shale that would have been considered inconceivable even probably 5 years ago. It is likely that the United States, it is possible, let me say, that the United States will be a net exporter of natural gas by 2016 or 2017. And so the exploration of non-conventional gas in the United States has just dramatically changed the economic picture for the United States. We are certainly happy to share at a government-to-government level what we have learned about shale gas and tight gas. Pakistan does indeed have the geologic potential for shale oil and gas. There's some technical factors that still need to be worked through, and we've had a dialogue with that. The U.S. Geological Survey gave the Pakistani delegation a briefing on what we think exists in terms of Pakistan's non-conventional gas. And Mr. Muniz offered for a delegation to visit the United States and visit the major Department of Energy labs that deal with renewables and non-conventional energy production. So, you know, I think all of that is, you know, heads us in the direction of technology transfer and certainly sharing of expertise and knowledge about the subject. I'm honestly not sure I understood what the second question was. Oh, well, yeah, that one I got. Yeah, okay, so the third question on capital flight and encouraging investment. Well, you know, I just first have to make an observation here, you know, because I think it's important, to, at least from the U.S. perspective, to understand that I think there's sometimes a narrative that has developed in Pakistan that it is our war on terror, that it is the U.S. war on terror, and that we drag Pakistan into it. Now, I have to challenge that because, you know, Afghanistan has been a challenge to the security of the region and the world for a long time. I would say that there are many places where you could say that that began, but it certainly was, you know, the most dramatic deterioration of the situation in Afghanistan began in December 1979 when the then Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. And I might, you know, I think it's worth pointing out that the strongest and initial response came from the government of Pakistan under Zia-ul-Haq, and the United States joined the effort later in 1982. We have a long history on this relationship working with Pakistan, and as I admit earlier in my remarks, in 1989 and 1992, I think we made some mistakes. But fundamentally, the reason that the United States has been in Afghanistan, and indeed the international community has been in Afghanistan for the past 12 years, has been because of the attack of the United States on September 11th of 2001. So I just think, I need to put that out there as in terms of the historical explanations of what has happened. But on the narrower point of encouraging investment, I think it's a very valid point. I think that I will say that, as I mentioned, that I led with Minister Abbasi a trade delegation to Houston precisely to encourage investment. We have an active dialogue with the Pakistan-U.S. Business Council, which is coming out, I think next month or the month after, is making a trip out here. We certainly do, when I go back to the States and when my members of my staff go back and when the Consul General goes back, we talk to American industry about the opportunities here, and we talk about the fact that American firms that have been here have done very well over the years. So I think we are, as much as possible, trying to encourage investment. That said, there are security challenges in Pakistan, and we can't ignore those. But we do make an effort to point out that where there are good opportunities, and I think that with the emphasis on economic reform that has characterized the current government, and especially with the program of privatization, I think there will be more opportunities for U.S. companies, and we'll certainly be prepared to draw their attention to them and encourage them to come.
Back, 3 questions, please.
My name is Waqar Mohammed. I would like to quote Mr. Olson's statement that America acknowledges the sacrifices made by Pakistan for them. Now, I would like to say that if they acknowledges this kind of statement, but majority of the Pakistan consider it as a lip service because action speaks louder than words. America has abandoned Pakistan in the past, and if we look at the current scenario, they are treating India with more respect and in every respect, like they are providing them the nuclear energy, civil energy, trade, military, everything, which is the arch rival of Pakistan. And Pakistan is getting only peanuts with respect to the India. So how would general masses of Pakistan consider it as a positive gesture from America?
I have a simple question. The war on terror started in 2001 after 9/11. It's been 13 years on. Do you think America has made the world a more peaceful and stable place to live in?
Why is US against Pak-Iran gas pipeline?
In the last 10 years or so, Pakistan's rail and road system has taken a lot of beating due to the over traffic of the American equipment to Afghanistan through this country. Do you have a plan to resuscitate and to rehabilitate our road and rail infrastructure just after you leave?
That's all. Ambassador will now answer these 3 questions.
Well, on the first question, I think our acknowledgement of Pakistan's sacrifices actually are more than just words. As I say, we have had an extensive program of cooperation with Pakistan, and we have attempted to reimburse Pakistan for its support for operations related to the war on terror, as well as to advance more specific goals, and we have a substantial security assistance program. With regard to the question of India, I understand the sentiment that was expressed. The United States does have a relationship with India, and we have never sought to define our relationship with Pakistan or with India in terms of the other country. This may be a particularly American point of view, but we would prefer to see win-win solutions, and we certainly don't see our relationship with Pakistan as being at the expense of our relationship with India, or the relationship, or vice versa, or our relationship with India being at the expense of Pakistan. And you know, I mean, there are any number of fields where you could point to where the United States has been much more involved over the years with Pakistan than it has been with India. I mean, some of the ones we've just been talking about, whether it's civilian assistance, that is to say the Kerry Lugar-Berman program, or military assistance, or, you know, a number of other fields. Let me just give you one, one particular example. We have the largest, or the greatest funding for a Fulbright program in the world here in Pakistan. We have more exchange programs between Pakistan and the United States than we do anywhere else in the world. And that's not saying that with regard to India in particular. I mean, it happens that we have a larger exchange program than we do with China, or, you know, many other countries around the world. So I think there are many aspects of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, you know, despite the fact that, you know, there are tensions and there have been ups and downs. There are many aspects to our relationship that are quite strong, have always been strong, and are indeed almost unique when we look around the world. The second question with regard to stability of the region. Well, look, I think we like Pakistanis, we fervently hope for stability for the region, and more importantly, we have put in place a number of policies and programs to encourage stability, especially with regard to Afghanistan post-2014. And again, these are economic commitments to working towards a political settlement and reconciliation in Afghanistan, where I would add we've worked very closely with the government of Pakistan, and Pakistan has been extraordinarily supportive of an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned reconciliation process. I think that we're doing everything that we can within our power to ensure that that post-2014 puts us on a path for regional stability. And I think the odds of that are still good and still better than even. It's impossible for me to actually predict what's going to happen in the future, but certainly we're working toward that end. On the Iran-Pakistan pipeline, I think our position on that is pretty well known. You know, we have, and it's not just us, but it's the 5 permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany, the so-called P5 plus 1, have real concerns about Iran's nuclear program. And that is why we have sanctions that are in place with regard to Iran. There have been some encouraging developments recently. The interim agreement between the international international community, the P5 plus 1, and Iran, and we have to get through that interim period under which Iran will reduce its nuclear enrichment. And some of the sanctions, at least for the U.S. government, the ones that are imposed within the executive branch, will be lifted. But it is still early days with regard to the relationship with Iran, and there are many questions that have to be answered and many tough negotiations that still have to be gone through. But on the point, with regard to partnership between the United States and Pakistan on energy, we feel we've been pretty good partners to Pakistan on energy. As I mentioned in my initial remarks, we have projects that we have financed have added 1,000 megawatts to the national grid. Those are 3 dams, Gomulzam, Satpara, and Tarbella, rehabilitation of all of those or completion, as well as thermal plants in Jamshoro and Muzaffargarh. We're helping to we've provided $95 million funding for a wind corridor in Sindh. And we are engaging our private sector to meet the long-term needs of Pakistan's development of gas. So I think we've been a good partner to Pakistan and will continue to be on the energy field writ large. On the question of roads, we have had a program of building roads in primarily in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and also in Fatah and in Baluchistan. We have added 600, we've resurfaced 600 kilometers worth of roads. I recently participated in the reopening of the Peshawar Ring Road, the inauguration of the Peshawar Ring Road, which was funded between the government of Pakistan and the U.S. We financed 60% of that. And then the additional point that I would make is that in terms of the wear and tear that may have been imposed under the agreement reached with the government of Pakistan in the summer and fall of 2012, the United States does pay, and NATO pays substantial charges for the shipment of cargo, and I believe some of that is meant to be reimbursement for, indeed, wear and tear on the roads. But we have a substantial program added 600 kilometers of roads. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I'm sorry that we are running short of time. I'll request Amina that next year she should allocate 2 hours rather than 1 hour for this session, because there are a lot of people who wanted to ask questions. Let me thank the Ambassador for coming especially from Islamabad, presenting his views, answering the questions, and we very much appreciate it. So let's give him a big hand.